Arthur sat on a weathered wooden bench in the waiting area of the District 4 police headquarters in Boston, his rough, calloused hands tightly interlocked. Traces of black engine oil still clung to his fingernails, an industrial solvent that the cheap soap at the service shop could never quite wash away. The charcoal gray suit he wore was borrowed from his cousin 3 years ago, the pant legs slightly too short, exposing worn-out wool socks that had lost their elasticity. Arthur did not look up at the busy officers passing by. Instead, his gaze was fixed on a transparent plastic evidence box resting on the interrogation table behind the one-way mirror. Inside that box, sitting isolated next to a peeling faux leather wallet and a rusty ring of keys, was a platinum ring set with a 12-carat Asher-cut diamond. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a cold, sharp glare onto the stone's facets, reflecting beams of light as piercing as a razor blade. 3 rows of seats away, 11-year-old Lily pulled her thin legs up against her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around a faded canvas backpack. Attached to the pack was a stuffed rabbit with a torn ear, a toy Arthur had salvaged from an industrial landfill behind the shipyards the previous year, meticulously washing it and sewing it back together with dental floss. Lily did not cry. Her eyes carried the exact same slate-gray hue as her father's, quiet and holding the premature maturity of children raised in damp, rented apartments on the outskirts of the city. Every few moments, she glanced down at the cracked screen of an old phone, where a short video on social media was racking up views at an alarming speed. In that video, her father was kneeling on the polished marble floor of a luxury Boston jewelry boutique, holding a refined woman's hand and smiling. It was a forced smile, yet his eyes held a warmth so profound it made viewers believe the two had been bound together for a lifetime. It had all begun 3 days earlier when Lily secretly used her father's account to sign up for a promotional campaign titled Fake Wedding, Real Love, organized by the prestigious Vaughn Jewelry Corporation. The woman at the helm of the empire was Eleanor Vaughn, a 32-year-old whose face was as chilly as an uncut diamond, notorious in high society for her ruthless perfectionism and unyielding demands. Eleanor needed a massive media stunt to revive the plummeting sales of her flagship store, and she decided to play the bride herself to prove to the elite that Vaughn's jewelry could elevate anyone to royalty. Arthur's application was selected entirely due to a software glitch. The automated system had misread his old resume title of Precision Mechanical Restoration Engineer as Master Craftsmanship Expert. By the time Arthur received the call and was dragged to the studio by Lily, it was already too late to back out. Eleanor stood on a raised wooden dais in the photo studio, her ivory silk satin wedding gown hugging her slender frame but radiating a pressure that suffocated the room. She stared at the man who had just walked in through the large vanity mirror, her arched eyebrows knitting together as she spotted Arthur's worn leather shoes, held together at the toes by a loop of black electrical tape. She turned to her assistant, her voice dropping into a sharp, low whisper that sounded like shears cutting through fabric. She demanded to know who authorized someone reeking of motor oil and the sweat of cheap subway cars to stand in the same frame as her. The assistant trembled while flipping through a clipboard, explaining that the media contract was signed, fashion journalists were waiting in the outer room, and if they canceled now, the company's stock would tank at the opening bell tomorrow. Eleanor let out a sharp breath, turning her face away from Arthur as her hand gripped a bouquet of white roses so tightly that an unclipped thorn pierced her palm. The photo shoot proceeded in an atmosphere as suffocating as a courtroom trial. The photographer constantly complained that the pair looked like a couple preparing to sign divorce papers, rather than two lovers drowning in bliss. Eleanor stood with her back rigid and her chin slightly raised, her body freezing up like a plaster statue whenever Arthur stepped closer under the director's orders. Arthur could smell the expensive cedarwood perfume drifting from Eleanor's high-up due, a scent that spoke of old wealth and sun-drenched penthouses. Conversely, Eleanor caught the scent of cheap tobacco embedded in the fabric of his jacket, the odor of exhausting manual labor. She made no effort to hide her disgust, muttering through a forced, rigid smile for the cameras that he should step back and keep his filthy fingers away from the premium silk of her gown. Arthur did not talk back. His face remained as flat and unreadable as the surface of a deep well. He simply took a silent step backward, maintaining a respectful distance that honored the woman's personal space while keeping both of them within the camera's frame. When the director instructed Arthur to perform the ring placement shot, Eleanor personally snatched the prop ring from its velvet tray and roughly pressed it into Arthur's palm. That was the moment their fingers brushed. Eleanor's skin was soft and flawless, while Arthur's was mapped with tiny scars from sharp metallic edges. Arthur held the ring, his eyes blinking faintly as his thumb grazed the lower underside of the band. He looked directly into Eleanor's eyes, and his gaze held no timidity of a poor man, only a strange, deep calmness that caused her heart to skip a sudden beat. Right at that second, a freelance photographer in the corner snapped a candid behind-the-scenes shot of the two in the middle of their tense exchange. In the photograph, Arthur's head was slightly bowed. One hand slid into his worn trousers pocket, while the other held the ring with an effortless, understated elegance. Eleanor was looking at him with a fiery glare, her lips slightly pursed in an expression of haughty irritation. Miraculously, through the lens of natural light streaming from the window, the image did not convey hatred. Instead, it sparked an explosive chemical reaction. Viewers saw a turbulent, sweeping romance between a quiet, weathered man and a fiercely proud lady. The photo was posted online with a brief caption by a travel blogger who happened to be present, and within 6 hours it amassed over 2 million likes and tens of thousands of shares globally. The following morning, as Arthur stood in the basement garage of his apartment building trying to crank up his 1998 Ford pickup truck, the engine sputtering with a loud rattle before dying out in a cloud of thick black smoke, a luxury black limousine pulled up right at the entrance. Eleanor's assistant stepped out, sweating profusely, holding a new contract with a payout equal to Arthur's entire annual salary at the garage. The city was going wild over their love story, and major entertainment outlets were desperate for an exclusive interview with the mystery husband of the jewelry queen. Eleanor was forced to swallow her pride. She sat inside the car watching Arthur through the heavily tinted glass, her chest burning with anger at having to rely on a man she considered beneath her just to save her family's legacy. Arthur looked at the check in the assistant's hand, then glanced up at Lily standing by the second-floor window, her worn-out sweater sleeves visible as she watched him with hopeful eyes. He let out a slow sigh and signed his name. The days that followed were a sequence of meticulously staged public performances hiding a fractured reality behind the curtains. They had to appear together at gala dinners and stroll down central avenues under a barrage of paparazzi flashes. Eleanor played the part of a blissful wife flawlessly before the lenses, but the moment the flashbulbs died down, her smile vanished instantly. She would climb back into the car and hurl a wet wipe at Arthur, so he could clean the leather seat he had just occupied. She called him an opportunist, a parasite clinging to the Vaughn name to upgrade his miserable existence. Arthur maintained an absolute iron silence. He didn't argue or offer explanations, and every time she spat a bitter word, he simply stared out the window, watching the rain beat against the heavy glass. The breaking point arrived during the gala celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Vaughn Corporation, hosted in the Grand Hall of the Boston Public Library. It was an opulent affair attended by politicians, art billionaires, and top-tier celebrities. Eleanor looked magnificent in a mysterious black evening gown, her neck adorned with a pearl strand worth millions, and on her ring finger was the Star of the Night, a 12-carat natural diamond known as the Heart of Boston. This was the heirloom of the Vaughn family, the ultimate symbol of the brand's prosperity and absolute prestige. Arthur walked beside her, still wearing the old suit that Lily had meticulously smoothed out with a small travel steamer, his hands kept behind his back to avoid smudging the satin tablecloths. Midway through the evening, while Eleanor was conversing with a group of major European investors, a loud noise echoed from the display area. The glass case housing the Heart of Boston had been breached. The building's alarm system hadn't gone off, but the $4 million diamond was gone without a trace. The air in the gala hall froze instantly as armed security personnel locked down all exits. Eleanor turned pale, looking around the room in absolute panic until her eyes locked onto Arthur, who was standing alone in a shadowed alcove near the hallway leading to the restrooms, his hands buried deep inside his jacket pockets. A security manager hurried over, whispering into Eleanor's ear that a blind spot surveillance camera had caught Arthur walking past the display case exactly 2 minutes before the theft was noticed. Eleanor felt a rush of hot blood surge to her face, a toxic cocktail of public humiliation and perceived betrayal resulting in an uncontrollable rage. She marched straight up to Arthur, demanding no context and waiting for no explanation, pointing her finger directly at his face in front of hundreds of elite onlookers. She screamed that she had known from day one he was a thief, a street rat who couldn't change his nature no matter what expensive clothes he was wrapped in, and she ordered security to search him immediately. Arthur did not flinch or look away from Eleanor. He stood perfectly still, letting 2 massive security guards roughly pin his shoulders down and thrust their hands into his pockets. From the deep pocket of his weathered jacket, a guard pulled out a glittering object and placed it onto a silver tray. It was the platinum ring holding the 12-carat Heart of Boston diamond. Horrified gasps rippled through the ballroom, and looks of utter disgust from the tuxedo-clad crowd fell upon the poor father. Eleanor looked at the ring on the tray, her eyes filled with a crushing disappointment and a strange sting of hurt she couldn't quite explain. She turned her back and ordered the police to cuff him. That was how Arthur ended up sitting in the interrogation room of the District 4 station at 2 in the morning, while Lily waited outside in the freezing lobby. Eleanor walked into the room accompanied by her private counsel. She intended to sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the charges on the condition that Arthur vanish from the city forever to prevent further damage to her brand. She looked at the man sitting across the metal table, her voice hoarse from exhaustion, asking him why he did it, why he would gamble his own daughter's dignity for an item he could never sell at any pawnshop on earth. Arthur finally raised his eyes, and his gaze toward Eleanor held no malice, only the terrifying composure of a man who saw through the entire board. He pushed the plastic box containing the ring toward her, his voice low and rhythmic, steady like the ticking of an antique grandfather clock. He stated that if she was truly the heir to the Vaughan lineage, she should take a proper look at what she called her family's crown jewel before sending him to a federal prison. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, picking up the ring from the plastic container and tilting it under the harsh fluorescent light. Arthur began to speak, and each word that left his mouth acted like a precision tool stripping away the layers of a massive fraud. He pointed out that the genuine Heart of Boston diamond possessed a highly unique physical characteristic, engineered in the last century by a French master craftsman. The inner band always featured 3 microgrooves designed to balance thermal pressure, preventing the diamond from fracturing during sudden temperature shifts. The ring in her hand, he noted, was completely smooth on the lower band, and the facet angles were cut at 59 degrees rather than the classic 61 degrees required by a traditional Asher cut, a telltale sign of modern laser-guided industrial replication common in counterfeiting labs in Nevada. This ring, he said quietly, was a high-grade cubic zirconia replica, and it had been swapped out at least 48 hours before the gala even began. Eleanor froze, her fingers trembling as she examined the band closely through a small jeweler's loupe provided by her lawyer. Every single detail Arthur mentioned was flawlessly accurate, precise down to the micrometer. She looked at him, her breathing growing shallow and rapid, demanding to know who he actually was to possess technical secrets that her own top gemologist would need hours in a laboratory to detect. Arthur let out a faint, bitter smile, rolling up his jacket sleeve to reveal a thick, jagged scar from a high-pressure casting explosion on his left wrist. He was no ordinary mechanic. 10 years ago, Arthur was the chief engineer of precision metallurgy and artifact restoration at the Royal Gemological Institute of London. He was the exact specialist Eleanor's father had personally flown in to appraise the diamond when he first acquired it at an auction in Geneva. But after a catastrophic laboratory accident claimed the life of his beloved wife and severely damaged the deep sensory nerves in his hands, he walked away from the industry entirely. He took his infant daughter and returned to Boston, living in complete obscurity to bury his grief. He had recognized the anomaly the moment his fingers touched the prop ring during their very first photo shoot, which was why he agreed to play along with the contract. He knew someone was attempting a historical heist using Eleanor as a shield. Arthur explained that during the gala, he caught the building's security manager, a man drowning in massive gambling debts, quietly moving toward the display case to execute the final swap and smuggle the real diamond out of the country. Arthur had followed him and snatched the fake ring from his hand before the manager could trigger a false alarm to frame an innocent bystander. However, the security manager was faster. He managed to slip the replica into Arthur's wide jacket pocket during their brief struggle in the blind spot, immediately crying wolf to turn Arthur into the perfect scapegoat. Just as Arthur finished his explanation, Eleanor's assistant burst into the interrogation room, his face completely drained of color. He handed Eleanor an emergency audit report that had just been forwarded from the central office. The security manager had gone completely off the grid immediately after the police escorted Arthur out, and an inventory check revealed that the corporation's raw diamond reserves at the central vault had been systematically emptied over the last 3 weeks via forged digital signatures. The entire Von empire was standing on the precipice of total bankruptcy if the news leaked to the press. Eleanor stood paralyzed in the center of the room, her designer gown now feeling like a heavy set of iron shackles anchoring her to the floor. She looked at the man across from her, the man she had insulted and degraded for a week, a man who wore a borrowed, fraying suit but possessed a mind and a soul that all her family's wealth could never buy. She realized she had committed a devastating error, an absolute violation of human dignity. Turning to the officers, she formally withdrew all charges and demanded Arthur's immediate release. By the time they stepped outside the precinct, it was nearly 4 a.m. Fog from the Boston harbor had rolled into the city, casting a thick white blanket over the cobblestone streets. Lily had fallen fast asleep on the wooden bench in the lobby, her canvas rabbit still clutched tightly to her chest. Arthur gently lifted his daughter into his arms. His back was slightly bent from exhaustion, but his hold on her was incredibly steady and tender. Eleanor followed them out, standing on the stone steps of the station, watching their figures retreat under the amber glow of the street lamp. She called out his name, her voice completely stripped of its usual arrogance, carrying a deep, vulnerable plea. She asked if he could ever find it in himself to help her save what remained of her father's legacy. Arthur stopped walking but did not turn around. He gently adjusted the thin blanket draped over Lily to keep the biting night air from waking her. He replied quietly that he didn't care about diamonds or the survival of the Von Corporation. He had only agreed to the contract because his daughter wanted to see her father wear a decent suit just once after 10 lonesome years in the dark of a garage. He took another step forward toward his old Ford truck, his boots clicking evenly against the frosted pavement, solitary, quiet, and unyielding. 2 weeks later, the heist case racking the Von Corporation was officially resolved using the technical notes and structural facet diagrams Arthur had left behind on the interrogation table that night. The rogue security manager was apprehended near the border, and the authentic Heart of Boston diamond was recovered from a secure locker at the transit terminal. Von stock did not crash. Instead, it surged after Eleanor held a live, unscripted press conference. She hid nothing, openly admitting her own blindness and arrogance before hundreds of reporters, while publicly honoring the silent engineer who had single-handedly saved a fashion dynasty. Late one afternoon toward the end of June, as a honey-colored sunset painted the tin roofs of the suburban repair yard, Arthur's old Ford truck finally hummed to life, its engine purring smoothly under his precise tuning. Arthur sat on a discarded tire next to his workbench, holding a chipped ceramic mug filled with black coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. Lily sat in the corner of the shop, using a small set of screwdrivers to carefully tighten a loose seam on her stuffed rabbit's ear, occasionally looking up to smile at her father. A faint sound broke the quiet at the garage entrance, and Eleanor walked in. She was no longer wearing extravagant evening wear or sharp corporate blazers. She wore simple denim jeans, a white linen shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and soft leather flats. She carried a small, polished ebony wooden box, placing it gently onto Arthur's oil-stained workbench. She stated quietly that this was not a job offer, nor was it a financial payout. It was simply an item she believed only the fingers of a true master deserved to touch. Arthur opened the wooden case, and inside lay not a priceless gemstone, but a complete set of 19th-century hand-carved metallurgy tools belonging to the original French engineer, an artifact her company had successfully won at an antique auction in Paris. Arthur looked down at the delicate files and the aged loops, and for the first time in a decade, his slate-gray eyes flickered with an emotion he had long kept buried. He looked up at Eleanor and saw that her face no longer held the frost of a jewelry queen, but the genuine, warm smile of a woman who had discovered the true weight of life beneath the artificial glare of wealth. He set his cold coffee down, lifted a small precision file from the box, and nodded softly as a peaceful, earned smile graced his face.